Warm welcome to our President, David Martin, and our speakers, Alex Hall and Michael Gahler. Thank you very much for being with us. Just before I hand over to David to chair our session this evening, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about a project that EMiS is running just now and introduce you to Victoria, who's with us. So we've had the great fortune of working closely with a Strathclyde University master's course through Dr. Rogelia Pastor Castro to have 5 interns working with us from the master's course studying diplomacy and international security. This means that our projects officer, David MacDonald, and a few of our exec members have been having a lot of help with various projects that are ongoing just now, including our Festival of Europe planning for our 10th and 11th May events. This is happening in Edinburgh. Please look out for information that'll be coming out soon about the events, which will be bookable in a couple of weeks. We also have a strategic review of the organisation underway, and David Rulston's been getting a lot of help from his intern on that. We're trying to really sort of revitalise the cross-party group in Holyrood. EMiS carries out the secretarial role for that group, and welcome any suggestions and ideas for topics or other members that should be being invited to that group. And we're also sort of building a new comms team and looking at our social media presence. And then for Victoria, her role is helping with designing this year's webinar programme. And one of the things that we would really like to do is involve our audiences slightly more in our webinars. So Victoria is going to tell you a little bit about her project, and that's going to also involve 5 questions, which we're going to put to you live online just before we start the webinar. And it would be great if you can all respond. There's various choices to make. And that will help to give David some feel for what our audience is thinking about the subject matter, and that will help to sort of influence where the discussion goes as well. So I'll just let Victoria explain a little bit about her project before we hand over to David. Thank you, Victoria.
No, thank you, Joe, for introducing me. Hi, everyone, and welcome. So I've had the great pleasure of researching democratic maintenance in Europe and creating sort of concise reports, analyzing cases, lessons, and reasons, particularly why Scotland might want to align itself more with Europe. And through my research, the fascinating commonality found between different autocratic leaders and far-right politicians is how they gain support and foster power. Leaders' pitches presented to citizens in order to promote far-right ideologies are founded on large societal problems such as poverty and unemployment. Leaders adhere to the unrest and the fear held for those complex issues and answer with simplistic solutions and targeted blame. We're seeing it, for example, in the promotion of harsh immigration laws from, for example, Alice Wild after rising to power with the AfD party in Germany. And the response to the right-wing movements and ideological uprisings has been to promote unity and collaboration from democratic states and institutions. States that are strong defenders of democracy, such as Scotland, would benefit from the collaboration and strategies that comes from finding commonality with others on the same mission. In the EU today, projects such as the European Democratic Shield is aimed to maintain free and fair elections, and these are initiatives that are state-driven and promoted. And my research have shown multiple cases where revitalizing democracy comes down to the legitimacy of states to adhere to their own democratic agreements. The EU, and most importantly, the states who believe in revitalizing democracy, are key actors in this mission. So thank you all so much for participating. I'm really eager to hear from our speakers about their insights and why states and citizens must be kept aware of democratic values and promote their protection. And as part of this webinar, we have a few questions for you to answer, which will appear on your screens. You can click to answer, and your input will really help support our ongoing research and shape the future campaigns for European movement. So we encourage everybody to participate, and I'll read them through with us. So the first one is, do you think that Europe is predominantly democratic? For the second, what roles should pro-EU civil society movements play in strengthening democracy? Do you believe the growing numbers of right-wing parties globally poses a risk to Scotland's democracy? For the fourth, ahead of the next year's Scottish elections, do you see as the biggest threat to democracy in Scotland? And for the final, how important is Scotland's connections to Europe in defending democratic values?
Thank you very much, Victoria, and I do hope that everyone will respond to the questions. And David, can I hand over to you now to please take us forward to our discussion? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo, and thank you very much, Victoria, and I look forward to seeing how people respond to the questionnaire. Just before I introduce the speakers, let me just say that the nature of this has changed slightly because world events have changed so quickly. So what we are going to discuss tonight is essentially how Europe responds to the democratic threats, both from within the European Union and externally, the security threats in terms of hot wars around Europe, and indeed the trade wars and other assaults that are now being made on the rules-based international order. And we're going to deal with it with Alexandra Hall speaking first, and she's based in Washington, and she's going to outline the situation globally, the challenges that she sees us facing. And then I hope Mikhail will be able to give us an outline on how the European Union is attempting to respond and react to those crises. So firstly, let me introduce Alexandra. She's a former British diplomat with interesting postings around the globe, including Bogota, New Delhi, and the United States. She served as the British ambassador to Georgia, which was originally going to be our specific focus tonight, before being appointed Brexit councillor at the British Embassy in Washington. She rather bravely and publicly resigned from this position, citing her dismay at the Brexit half-truths and the lack of honest messaging being delivered to the UK citizens. Her previous roles include head of the Middle East Peace Process Unit, head of humanitarian affairs with the United Nations, and head of the Human Rights and Democracy Department. She's now the co-host of Disorder, a podcast, and a member of the Commission on Political Power, which is examining reforms to the British political system. Additionally, she is a trustee of the Eurasia Foundation, which promotes civil society, good governance, and capacity building in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. She's also spent 2 years as a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council and has taught the human rights course at George Washington University. So very well qualified for the introduction she's about to give us to the global issues that we currently face. Alexandra. I think you might be muted.
Oh, I thought I wasn't sure I could unmute myself. So hello, everybody, and thank you very much, European Movement Scotland, for inviting me, and to Jo and David for that very nice introduction. And I look forward to seeing the results of the questions that Victoria put to you. I gather we're competing with a Scottish football game, so I will try and make this lively and engaging. But unfortunately, I'm not in a position to make this very cheerful, because the message I'm going to deliver is extremely serious, and some might say I'm exaggerating, but I think I'm not. I think we are in the gravest moment that I certainly can recall in my diplomatic career. Luckily, I'm not the one trying to provide the answers. Michael is the one trying to find the answers for what the EU can do in response to this challenge. But what I'm really going to talk about is just how bad it is here in Washington, which is where I'm now based. And basically, my message is that America is no longer the leader of the free world. This isn't a blip. This is a serious change, a reversal in decades of US foreign policy, in upholding values and principles and campaigning for freedom and democracy everywhere. The US is no longer in that game. US foreign policy under Donald Trump is a values-free proposition. Donald Trump and his administration seem to make no distinction between democracies and autocrats. They establish relationships with other countries defined upon power and opportunism, and opportunities to make money or to gain advantage. If a country has something which Donald Trump thinks he can profit from, or that the US can gain some advantage from, he will be willing to do business with you. So if you have minerals for sale, like in Ukraine, then you might get something back from America. I just saw in the news today that the Democratic Republic of Congo has now told the Trump administration that they can have access to their minerals as well if the US will help them resist the Rwandan-backed militia in the north of the country. If you cooperate with this administration on immigration, this administration will overlook your dire human rights record, as is the case with El Salvador, where the US deported, as is well known now, 3 plane loads of Venezuelan immigrants last week. I think the fact that the US still talks about pivoting to Asia and being very concerned to push back on China and Iran is nothing to do with the human rights record of those countries, or that their values are completely unaligned with those of the democratic West. I believe the only reason this administration cares about the US and Iran is because they see them as geopolitical rivals. It's no longer a values proposition as well. We have seen the US abandon commitments to NATO or cast doubt on them. You have seen the US pour scorn on the EU as an institution and the values which the EU represents. You have seen it put pressure on Ukraine to compromise to an unsustainable peace deal with Russia. I believe that the US will not honor its defense commitments to Taiwan either. And I believe it will also put at risk democracy in South Korea and Japan as well. And I believe we will see US silence when we see democratic rollbacks in countries around the world. I was checking today, and as far as I can see so far, there appears to have been no US statement on events in Turkey over the last 24 hours, for example. This administration, oh, my son is home. What?
I'm going fishing.
Okay, my son is going fishing. I'm sorry, we're at the hour when my kids make appearances. This administration, as you know, has cut its USAID budget by 83%. This includes the entire budget line that was supposed to be spent on democracy promotion and support for civil society. The motive behind this is not just ostensibly to save money for the US taxpayer. This administration actively opposes democracy promotion. They have absorbed the Russian narrative that efforts by countries in the West to support human rights defenders and promote democracy, observe elections and the like is unwarranted meddling in the affairs of other states, which complicates relations with those states and is detrimental to US interests. This is a very short-sighted and narrow view of US interests, but I believe that is the prevailing view in this administration. Elon Musk, who doesn't need any introduction, sadly, has described the National Endowment for Democracy, the flagship organization which Congress funds to promote democratic values around the world. He has described it as a scam, a criminal organization led by left-wing Marxists who are anti-American, which might come as news to the many Republicans who sit on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy and some of its affiliated partners. So this administration has not just cut democracy funding and support for civil society, they've also frozen payments to the National Endowment for Democracy. They have suspended the operations of the Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Asia, and a number of other US-funded outlets which provide fact-based information to countries where there is limited availability to free and accurate information. The administration has also withdrawn from the UN Human Rights Council and has announced it will review all its funding to all UN bodies. On top of that, of course, domestically, this administration is launching an unprecedented challenge on the US's own democratic checks and balances. It is restricting the media, it is attacking civil society, it is firing civil servants who try to resist unlawful actions, it is arrogating powers from Congress on how to spend money, and so far it has even shown itself willing to defy court rulings. So what are the results of all of this? The results of this are that, first of all, it is immensely demoralizing for human rights defenders and democracy activists around the world. It leaves them completely exposed because they can no longer rely upon the US to have their back, or even in cases of extreme danger, offer asylum to very prominent democracy activists. And also, of course, the cut of funding kneecaps the ability of these organizations to carry on their work in countries like Georgia, which is the country I was originally going to talk about, where there isn't a sufficiently mature local sector able to support civil society. So organizations like Transparency International or the Georgian Young Lawyers Association are completely dependent on overseas funding. And without US funding and without US backing, they're very vulnerable. It also, of course, emboldens autocrats to believe they can get away with further repression, which again is exactly the case, as is happening in Georgia. The withdrawal of the US from the development and humanitarian space opens space for Russia and China to move in. And we, of course, have seen particularly active efforts by China and Asia, Latin America, and Africa to build up their position. And it also makes it much easier for them to spread disinformation and try to subvert societies from within with no pushback from the US. And it encourages other wannabe dictators to think, well, if the US can get away with doing all this stuff, I can do the same. I can challenge elections. I can defy rules of law. I can intimidate my media and fire workers who I don't see as loyal, because that's what Trump is doing. And again, with reference to Georgia, I just saw this week that the Georgian Ministry of Defense has just fired 150 workers there for being insufficiently loyal. So what do I think Europeans should do? And I'm going to really leave this one to Michael. But really, it means that Europe is the front line for standing up for democracy now, not just within Europe, but globally. And Europe has to step up to this moment. One of the risks that's been identified, and unfortunately the UK has already had to take that very tough decision, is that the UK, in order to free up funds for its military, has announced a cut in its own international aid budget. There's no easy choices here, but I believe if other administrations around Europe also feel the pressure of the purse, don't cut the funding to civil society and human rights defenders, cut development aid, don't cut the civil society and human rights aid. Also, tighten our criteria for what meets the, don't be tempted to compromise on our own democracy criteria. And again, with reference to Georgia, the EU has had this agonizing decision as it has seen democracy in Georgia backslide. Should we close the door on Georgia ever being able to join the EU? Well, we would never say never to Georgia. I say we, I'm sorry, the UK is no longer in the EU. I don't think the EU would ever close the door permanently, but it's been reluctant to really definitively tell the Georgian government that's it, because we don't want to be guilty of losing Georgia forever. But I feel the time for compromise is now well past, and the EU needs to be very strong and clear in its messaging. And as for what to do with the traitors within our midst, like Hungary, I'm going to leave that one to Michael. So those are my cheerful opening remarks. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. As you say, not terribly cheerful, but a reflection of reality. And let's hope your son comes back with some fish and that cheers you up. Let me now turn to, well, before I turn to Mikael, can I just say to the participants that if you wish to put a question, please put it in the chat box. You will see that we already have a message rather than a question in the chat box about the Festival of Europe that's coming up in Scotland. And you can find more details of that on the Festival of Europe.bsky.social. And I'd encourage you to do that because it will be a very interesting and good event. But let's move on to our second speaker. Michael Gahler is an individual I worked with in the European Parliament, and I was always very impressed with his work, particularly his promotion of democracy. He's a German MEP and he's from the CDU. Before his election to the European Parliament, he worked for the German Federal Foreign Office. And during his diplomatic service, he focused on international environmental policy, Germany's bilateral relations with the Baltic states, and the Council of the Baltic Sea States. He was elected to the European Parliament in 1999, and he currently serves as the Foreign Affairs Coordinator for the EPP. He's a senior member of the European Parliament's delegation to the Joint Parliamentary Assembly with the ACP states and the delegation to Africa EU Parliamentary Assembly, and also the delegation for relations with South Africa. And he's the current European Parliament Rapporteur on Ukraine. He's also closely involved with the European movement, I'm delighted to say, and he serves as one of the German vice presidents of the European movement. As you'll have gathered from what I've just read out, this is an extremely busy time for Mikael, and I'm delighted that he's managed to find time tonight to join us. Mikael.
Well, thank you very much, David, and it's good to see you again in good shape and pro-European engagement. And also, well, Didi Matlova, Alexandra, for making Sakartvelo, Georgia, an issue also, which is one of our countries where at least the parliament is looking very closely at. Yes, indeed. Unfortunately, I have to say, I have to subscribe to everything that you said as far as the United States is concerned. We are all affected by this policy shift, not least when it comes on Ukraine. But you mentioned US aid, all the programs that have been stopped from one day to another. And we can go through the world and see the immediate effects. I was 3 weeks ago in South Africa with the South Africa delegation, and the US stopping their support for the AIDS programs. It's 17% of the entire AIDS scheme and policies of South Africa was US money. Now you can say, well, then it's only 17% less. No, if there are, most of the projects are co-financed, and then if you withdraw your 17%, and there may be more in individual projects, and then the entire thing might collapse in many ways. And they are really, it's only one example for South Africa, what is happening there, and it's the rest of Africa. We see that probably 100,000 more people will die from malaria this year because the funding for these global funds for malaria money is missing from the US. And that amounts, these are the figures that I got, to 100,000 people dying more from malaria. That is in this area, closer to us. Indeed, we are facing the challenge to compensate quite something that the US has left. When I look on Ukraine, when I look on Georgia, when I look on Moldova, we have at short notice being able to, for the NGOs and civil society in Ukraine, we were able to mobilize a short-term injection, additionally 4 million, but that doesn't make NDI or IRI work again. it's then directly going to the Ukrainian NGOs. We have closely cooperated with NDI and with IRI. And I really wonder when you refer to the stop of the money for the National Endowment for Democracy, how can that be that Democrats and Republicans simply accept that? They, out of this budget, NDI and IRI are financed. These are the two foundations for the two major parties. And I'm shocked to see that there are no checks and balances, that everybody is afraid of the midterms, not to dare to protest against Musk. That is really something that is, well, shocking is the word for me. I don't have such a variety of words as I'm not a native speaker. What we see here in Europe, apart from that, to have a situation on security issues, that there is a discussion that the United States, for the first time since the inception of NATO, would like to drop the function as a SACEUR, the Supreme Commander in Europe. And that shows, well, he cannot step out of NATO directly because there was a law from the Congress, so he is bypassing it. And if you drop, if he goes ahead with dropping the SACEUR, that also shows a bit about possible commitments in the future. And overall, that is, I said already, if you look at the daily in the morning, the latest news from the US, I think Putin is not, the one thing that he does not do, he doesn't drink alcohol, but all his entourage is probably permanently drunk because of all the champagne that they are drinking, because the United States is leaving globally, their influence is dropping all democracy programs, and that is really outrageous. Now, but on Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, we are busy here to take it over behind the scenes. There are already the calculations. The entire program per year is $150 million. We don't need to take it all, but we would take the languages that go outside the EU. There's no need that we have additional programs. We will keep Hungarian probably, because in Hungary it's almost as outside Europe when you look at the media situation there. So there are plans, both in the parliament we are discussing, in the Endowment for Democracy, and in the council. They had informal talks on Monday for the Foreign Ministers' Council. This issue was an issue. It's not yet formalized, there are no proposals yet, but we are working on that, not to let this great tradition of Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty simply drown in the amount of all these executive orders that change so much when it comes to well, America having been the leader of the free world. Now, what else are we doing, and what do we have to do? I mean, there is the aspect, you saw the decisions that have been taken concerning defense. I mean, it's already enough to see that there are doubts about America's commitments on Article 5 in case of need. That is already enough for Putin to rejoice in this area. And when it comes to the trade measures that he takes on the tariffs, I mean, it's something where the Chinese lean back and are happy to see how the West is at loggerheads with each other, and how we are mutually causing us pain by mutually then raising the tariffs instead of lowering them or abolishing them, and seeking common ground on global trade to set Western standards for global trade and not Chinese standards. Yeah, I mean, it's really, we are in a situation where we can only hope that the negative effects of this policy will trickle down quickly domestically. I mean, Americans don't care whether there is IRI or NDI in Ukraine or in Moldova or not. That's not the issue. But if really through these tariffs, where Trump apparently thinks that he raises the tariffs and we pay the price, no, it's the American importers handing it further to the American consumers. And as the US can obviously not replace our good quality products from Europe, be it cars, be it machinery, be it other products, as they cannot replace it, they will keep buying it at a higher price, and that will have this inflationary effect, hopefully to be felt by the people. And when the other domestic issues, like on Medicare, when many millions are falling out of medical protection somehow, that they cannot finance their health requirements any longer, I hope that many of those who have voted in wrongly for Trump, thinking that he does something for the poor people, that there will be a reaction already in the midterms. But that is still, well, today it's 3 years and 10 months sharp, and then he is out. But what will be left after he is out of this America as we knew it, and of the relationship, the transatlantic relationship that we cherish so much, and that has preserved our freedom and created unprecedented levels of wealth. So for the European Union, the motto, the slogan now is unity. Unity that can also not be blocked by Orban, to put it bluntly. We will take the necessary decisions, both with regard to the defense issues, but when it comes, as I said, to democracy promotion in those countries, in the Western Balkans, in Ukraine, in Moldova, we will by no means lower our programs because of defense requirements, no, but we will try to increase it. And in South Africa, I said very clearly, contrary to the US, we are reliable partners. We have long-term commitments in a country like South Africa, and the same applies to other countries, and we will honor them. There is no argument for us from one day to another to end such programs. So I hope that in the rest of the world, in order that they know there are the Europeans who are good partners, and there is no need to allow the Chinese to fill the vacuum that the US leaves. Yeah, if in this regard we are on the trade side working a lot. I hope we will finally get the Mercosur Accord also through our parliament. I think insofar Trump has already also contributed to convincing skeptical people also to agree to that. We are starting with India. We have concluded with New Zealand. We are still busy with Australia. There are other parts of the world where we have already our free trade. And I hope, and I'm confident that our relationship with Canada will become closer because of the attitude that the United States currently takes. In Denmark, by the way, there is an internal discussion both in Denmark and in Greenland. What is the best way to save Greenland from the ambitions of Trump? And even the nationalists seem to think, well, perhaps as Greenland left in '84 the European Union, that the Danes would take them in again in the first step. And in the second step, then when Greenland is economically further developing, then the Greenlanders would decide whether they would become independent inside the EU, like all the 28th or whatever member state, or whether they would really go it alone. And I think, given the experience with this current administration, I'm confident that a debate on that will rather be independent within the EU. In Iceland, the discussion is ongoing now. So should we not, especially as NATO, they are a NATO member without an army, so they depend on all of us in NATO. They are starting a discussion to come in because they are already in the European Economic Area. So that is a small step, politically important, but economy-wise, they are already integrated. I'm looking forward to having the same debate in Norway. I mean, they are not in the EU, of course, but they have been in NATO and thought that is enough. But if NATO is not reliable, I think there is something developing. And I'm now not in a position I wish you all back. And if only Scotland, I wish Scotland back, yes. But this has for other reasons not been too high on the agenda recently. But perhaps also in the United Kingdom, this debate that was perhaps foreseen for the next generation of politicians to rejoin the EU at some point, perhaps this generation gap will be shortened, and we might get we will have to get all our acts together. And when we then look in an ideal case from the north, yeah, and we would have Norway and Iceland and Greenland, and of course all the islands in between, and at some point, perhaps in an optimistic thinking, at some point Britain back, and with Canada, why should they not have a status like the European Economic Area? If the US treats them in this nasty way, why should they not? We have CETA already, and let's upgrade CETA and have more. So that strengthens democracies in the North Atlantic, hopefully, and that is now, of course, a bit hypothetical, but certain discussions are ongoing. And on the short term, indeed, we will do everything to strengthen our resolve, also to support Ukraine. We consider Ukraine, it's our first line of defense. And we have no interest, not only that Ukraine falls into this Soviet, deliberately say Soviet sphere again, and the Ukrainians don't want it. And if it were that we let Putin win, then we would definitely see, before he reaches our borders, we would have a 2-digit millions of Ukrainians on our soil. I want Ukraine to become member of the European Union, not Ukrainians join the EU without their country. So I make a stop here. I mean that we have some time to discuss perhaps on the issues that are of interest.
Excellent, Mikhail. Thank you very much. And I like both your optimism and your ambition in terms of where the EU might be going. Perhaps I've a few questions myself, but rather than start with my own questions, we've got quite a few questions coming in the chat now, and perhaps unsurprisingly, a lot of them are to do with defence. And perhaps I could divide that into two. Bill Rogers, if I paraphrase his question right, is basically saying Trump is continuity America, really, that America has been behaving America first since for a long time, but he particularly specifically quotes Bush's invasion of Iraq. And so should we expect America to carry on the way it's been carrying on, Alexandra, or is Trump just a more obvious example of where America was going anyway? Mikhail might have a view on that, but perhaps more germane to Mikhail, the question specifically about the European defence. David Rolson asks, what is the potential for a European defence infrastructure? So I guess he doesn't mention it, but I guess what he means is rearm. Is rearm going to be successful or not? Can it actually work? Can we get the unity that's required around it? And David Gow, again, a little bit more provocative, and would be a question for both speakers, really. Should we just give up on NATO? Should we get the Americans out of NATO and create our own defence forces? Is it too late to have any decent relationship with the US in terms of defence? Maybe, Alexandra, again, we could let you to kick off on that, then Mikhail could comment.
Okay, thank you very much. It's nice to see the engagement. I don't think Trump is a continuity of US policy. I think there's always a risk with administrations that each one is a backlash and a reaction to the one before. So George Bush tried to promote democracy at the barrel of a gun in the Middle East, and that was not a successful endeavor. So you then had Barack Obama, in my view, going too far the other way and saying we were too pushy and we need to back off. And then, of course, that led to the failure to enforce the red line in Syria and trying to reset relations with Russia and not reacting sufficiently strongly to what was going on in Georgia and Ukraine in 2014. So you have this sort of pendulum swing. However, we have not had a president who has so decisively broken with the notion that democracy promotion is consistent with US security interests, that freedom around the world, free markets, and free societies make good partners, reliable allies, and good trading partners for the US. Trump is pursuing a completely different philosophy, that democracy promotion and human rights gets in the way of the US, is contrary to US interests. You might disagree with George Bush's methods on Iraq, but the freedom agenda was sincere in the Middle East, even if it was badly done. It was a sincere belief that a more free and democratic Middle East would be a more stable one. So Trump is quite different in that. And of course, his policy on tariffs, as Michael said, is a complete and utter nonsense. And again, goes against decades of a view that free trade is in the US's interests. As for whether Europe should withdraw from NATO, I don't think we should withdraw from NATO, but I certainly think we should develop more strategic autonomy, and the ability we need to reduce our dependence on the US, whether that requires new structures or just getting on with whatever's left of NATO, whether the US chooses to participate or not. We have to increase our own capabilities. We have to have our own European decision-making procedures. I can't remember who I was listening to last week. Oh, it was somebody from the Royal United Services Institute who was talking about a European Security Council, or, if you want to include Canada or democracies in Asia, it's some kind of different security mechanisms that the US can't veto. We have to just improve our capabilities and not be so reliant. I'll stop there. I like getting lots of questions.
Thank you. Excellent. And we do have lots of questions. Mikhail.
Yes. I think from our side, we should definitely not invite the US to leave. From our side, I think we should keep assume that there is a NATO that exists, and from ours definitely not give a pretext for leaving. And at the same time, you are totally right, and we have done that already to get the European pillar of NATO stronger. And at the same time, that is then, or everything that we do in the European framework also serves the European pillar of NATO, where we have a single set of forces. We have our defense plannings, we have a capability development plan, we have NATO standards. But what we also see, as one example only, that even after 75 and now 76 years of NATO, we have agreed standards that people do not follow. I recall 3 days before the full-scale war, for instance, we were in Lithuania at this NATO enhanced forward presence with the multinational soldiers, and we asked them, what is your daily business? And they said, we try to communicate with each other. So after 73 years at the time, now 76 years, we still afford standards, not harmonized standards, or we afford to agree on standards and then don't follow up on them. So that is the difference where I would say in the European Union, we have tens of thousands of civilian standards in the single market, but we have no agreed standards in the EU on military. Why not? And that is my suggestion, very precise and concrete. Why not take agreed NATO standards and make them copy-paste EU regulations, which are binding? And if there is no follow-up, then there's a treaty obligation, a treaty violation procedure at the court. So let us make use of all the possibilities that we have. Now we have this Rearm Europe, we have the White Book on Defense that Commissioner Kubilius presented, and last week in Strasbourg we had Madame von der Leyen with the Rearm Europe. Yes, it is something, on the one hand, the 650 billion euros, that is the money where the Commission says, we will not chase you because of deficit spending, because of the Euro Stability Pact, but that is your money that you can use and take extra credits to have your defense budgets upgraded. And the other 150 billion, that is where on the union level the credits should be taken up and given the possibility for member states to have common projects. It's about common projects. We cannot afford individual planning, individual purchasing or procuring, and then buying it everybody his own thing, and then be surprised that we don't profit from economies of scale when we procure together. and that we are not interoperable when we stay in the old way. And in this white book and in this framework, there are a lot of things that go in the right direction, but we must make use of it. And we have had so many wake-up calls. At the latest in 2014, it was, well, perhaps 2008 in Georgia should have been the first wake-up call. Then 2014, Crimea and East, and then 2022. And still there is so much old thinking around. And now I think it's good that the Commission takes the initiative and pushes the agenda and very clearly setting the priorities. It is about capability development indeed. And let's not forget, and it's highly interesting, the capacity of the Ukrainian arms industry has enormously enlarged, and they are, as they are practicing all their developments, and they are excellent in many ways on howitzers, on drones and other things, so that we can also profit from that. And that's the best way to help the Ukrainians, to give them cash that they can fully make use of their capacities, which they are not fully using. It's around 17 billion euros or dollars amount of capacity that is unused currently as we speak. So and also the Ukrainian products are far cheaper than ours, so more value for money. But for us, definitely, we have in principle, and David knows it because we had it already with the Lisbon Treaty, those installations, EU Military Committee, EU Military Staff, we have the European Defence Agency, we have these annual coordinated annual review on defense, where everybody brings what they have got to Brussels, and then we gather all together and know what we've got. When we know what we've got, we can define what we need with our capability development plans. So let's make full use of what we can do, and not put the snooze again after the wake-up call. And it must be quick. We are convinced that Putin will test us before the end of this Trump administration, before the end of this phase where it is not clear whether the Americans will live up to their obligations. And that is why we must lose no time and get together on a better defense. I'm optimistic that now everybody goes in this direction, especially the new German government, where tomorrow is the final vote in the Federal Council that we can lift our restrictions on taking credits for defense and the other issues. And I hope that Germany will be more in the lead, and we will not discuss about the German vote in the Council because there's again an abstention because we don't position ourselves. No, there is real commitment also from the incoming Chancellor. Insofar, when there is some more leadership also from the Germans, then the others will also follow up, I think. Or we go there where they are already. When the Germans take a position that the Poles, the Baltics, and the Nordics take, that is really something that I would like to see.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Mikael. I want ReArm to work. I would like to think we could have a successful defence fund, but just looking at the reports of even today's European summit, you have the Dutch on the one hand saying that defence is a national interest and therefore it shouldn't be financed at European level. You have the Italians saying exactly the opposite, that national checkers cannot afford to take on the debt, so they want it to be a European responsibility. And you have the Spanish saying, yes, we want the money, but we want to use it for cyber security, we want to use it for environmental security as well as for what we'd normally call traditional defence. Is there and of course we've got the Hungarians, which we'll push to one side, but is there enough solidarity and common purpose, even with this threat from Ukraine, to actually get agreement on this, to move ahead in a serious way with it?
Well, I think once the discussion goes on, the European Council doesn't take the decisions. Legislation and all that is then a bit further, and we need to continue this discussion. And at the end, if it were that we are not coming to terms with what is proposed, then there is still the coalition of the willing. And that is required. And if it is the EU without Hungary or Slovakia, and for opposite reasons or other reasons, the Dutch would opt out, we cannot, but then when it's a coalition of the willing, it's not the EU as EU. So then Britain can be fully part of that and should be full part of participate in what is needed. And Norway and to name but these two, then I mean, it's not the ideal case and certainly not for us parliamentarians, because then we wouldn't have a say. But on the issue itself, which requires urgent decision, and you know what the Commission has also put it, has put these things for the 150 billion. They have put it on Article 122, which on the one hand excludes the Parliament, but on the other side does not require unanimity. So if there is a qualified majority still, yeah, then it can still be done with this Article 122. And I'm confident that at the end we will have it, and it will be more refined and defined what is needed, and then we should be able to go ahead.
Thank you. I want to put one more question to both of you on defence, but just say to the administrator that it would be good to get the results of the survey after these questions. Then we'll move on away from defence and onto some of the economic questions that have been asked. But my basic question, because you hinted at this, we possibly only have 3 years or a bit more under the Trump administration to get our act together. Are we really capable of getting our act together in that short period of time? And this is a question, really a variation of a question Bill Rogers has put on the chat. Are we really in a position to defend Ukraine? And in addition, I have this fear that we get a coalition of willing, we get boots on the ground in Ukraine. And if you look at what happened in Srebrenica and even recently in Lebanon and so on, and Putin is very unpredictable, as you well know, and the Russians march into Ukraine, are we going to fire at them? Because then we'd be at war with them. And if we're not prepared to fire at them, what is the purpose of having our troops on the border between Ukraine and Russia? And the answer I sometimes get to this is Putin wouldn't dare. Well, Putin's dared a lot that we wouldn't have expected him to dare. So maybe just put that to both people, both speakers, and then we'll take the survey results after that. I don't know if Alexandra, if you want to, not an easy question, but whether you want to tackle that one first.
Yeah, thank you. And I was also seeing a lot of questions in the chat about, can the UK be really integrated in defence terms with the EU without rejoining the single market or customs union? And what is the scope, given that the UK still has a very close defence and security relationship with the US? Well, these are all extremely difficult questions, and there's no guarantees at all any of this is going to work out. We don't know if European solidarity will hold. We don't know if there'll be sufficient political will to re-gear our economies, to raise the money and put it into defence, whether in elections there will be a pushback from voters who want to protect their social security. There will be efforts by Russia to subvert our democracies from within even more and use misinformation, and there will be right-wing parties tempted to play to that. There will be the use of cultural arguments about values and wokeness and DEI and all of that nonsense. So all of these are very difficult questions. But we have no option here. We just have to try. And so there's no guarantee of success, but if we don't do anything, we're certainly doomed to failure. And I was speaking to a former Democratic member of Congress just yesterday, actually, and he said, he quoted Will Smith from the movie After Death, and he said, the danger is very real, but fear is a choice. So yeah, I don't know if we will be able to muster an effective peacekeeping force for Ukraine, or not peacekeeping, but a kind of trigger force in Ukraine. NATO's always operated on a kind of, I'm trying to think of the right word, it's not a con trick, but a confidence trick that we will have each other's back in a moment of crisis. And so, yeah, we're going to be tested on this, and we may be tested on this without the backing of the US. So this is a moment, and I don't know how our leaders will respond, but we have put forces in Estonia, the Germans have been leading brigades. You've got a great government committed to spending more on its defense. Europe is responding to all of these. And there's nothing like necessity to galvanize action. So I don't know is the answer. I was actually quite struck by something that Michael said about with the UK. It had always been talked about as rejoining the EU being a next generation issue that we weren't going to be able to overcome or move ahead faster than that. And maybe necessity is galvanizing a change in British attitudes as well. We still have a British Prime Minister who's very nervous of upsetting the Brexit vote, and so being very cautious. But we can see in the opinion polls, attitudes in the UK are changing. And I think it requires both the UK and the EU to think outside the box. The UK doesn't deserve special treatment from the EU. We understand that we're a third country. We chose to leave. However, we have to make common cause with the EU on defence and security. We have to figure out how to establish common procurement to work together. And so I think it's incumbent on both of us to think outside our current red lines and just to accept the needs require us to think bigger. The UK needs to stop its neuralgia on things like the role of the European Court of Justice. And I hope that the EU might be willing. I know there are some countries that feel very strictly about this, but we're in very different geopolitical times. The UK isn't just any third country. It just isn't. And so I'm hopeful, and I would hope that bigger minds and bigger thinking would prevail on both sides. And the UK, I don't think, sorry, just to make one last point, this issue about, but the UK is so intertwined with the US. Well, I don't think we can rely upon the US. In intelligence terms, frankly, not a spy, frankly, an organization that is headed by Tulsi Gabbard is not an organization I want to be sharing intelligence with, frankly. And so the UK needs to be thinking about its own independent defense and intelligence requirements. Other countries have capabilities. They may not be as good as the US, but look, at the start of the, in previous moments of crisis, I mean, Ukraine, nobody thought Ukraine would resist Russia, and it has. So we are a rich and powerful continent. We can do this. I know we shouldn't quote Wir schaffen das, but we can. So we need to find the political will. But if we don't try, we certainly won't get there.
Absolutely. And your point about American intelligence, I saw a great cartoon of two people sitting in an audience listening to Trump saying that he's not going to share his intelligence with Ukraine, and one saying to the other, well, that must be a relief for them. Which
well, was it with Ukraine or with UK?
Yeah, well, it was Ukraine.
What about the 5 eyes? Huh? Is that something, will it be reduced to 4 eyes without the US?
Yeah, well, these are good. We joke, but these are serious points, actually. Well, I'll let you answer first, Mikael, but I don't want to lose the point that both you and Alexandra raised about the UK, because I did want to come back to what I thought. I agree with your comment. I think the timescale, and I'm not saying it's imminent, but I think the timescale for the UK rejoining the EU has been brought forward by all these recent events. But I want to come back to that after the survey. If we could maybe finish off on the defence sector, if you want to make your final comments on that before we move on to other issues.
Well, once again, indeed, we will be. There is this great fear that we will be tested. We need to see to it and get this notion, this resilience that we have in some countries like Finland. Yeah, they are used to Russian pressure, and they have developed this resilience, and we haven't got it in the center of Europe or further west. What the Eastern Europeans have developed, and not to be afraid of Putin. I think it is this fear on the one side in the general public that is also fueled by all these propaganda and of the social media that comes from Russia, and on the other side, a lack of leadership on our side. Unfortunately, I have to say that the acting outgoing chancellor has not. He has held his famous speech on Zeitenwende, yes, but the implementation thereof, also in the mindset of the people, that has failed somehow. There was not the feeling that we are really under threat. And this feeling that is now there, and plus, and who can help us? At the moment, it's the Ukrainians, is the best army in Europe to defend also us in the first line. And that is why we have no choice. Either we wait till Putin tests us, and I think that's not a good idea. So let's rather strengthen the Ukrainians, either that they keep on fighting because the conditions that Putin sets are simply unacceptable. So we must support them further and stronger. Or when there is a ceasefire, it must be a robust one, something that continues deterring Russia. We must continue delivering weapons. And when Keir Starmer says boots on the ground and planes in the air, as I said, the first line of defense are the Ukrainians. We are certainly not the ones with our boots in the first line on the ground, but in the supply lines, certainly, and in training, perhaps training inside Ukraine, and air and air defense, so to say, to close the sky. I think that should be something that we could do, and where Putin knows that we have, I think, 3 times, as a West, we have 3 times more planes than he has. So I think planes in the air could also be contributing. Then, if there is will and resolve, then we can be strong enough to see to it that Putin doesn't get through.
Thanks very much. I don't know if, can we now show the results of the survey? Yes, we can. There we are. So I would say on balance, people think
Wow.
we're reasonably we're mainly democratic. Only a very small percentage don't think we are.
Wow.
There's strong support for, not quite as strong as the belief on democracy, but there's strong support for civil society support and the actions of civil society in relation to democracy. And yes, over half of the survey thinks that the rise of right-wing parties are a threat to Scottish democracy. And again, well, interesting. The misinformation is seen as the most threatening to democracy in Scotland. The right-wing populism coming second. I guess you could actually conflate these two things, but they're separately on the survey. And perhaps not so unsurprising for our audience, 100% think it's extremely or somewhat important that Scotland remains connected to Europe for defending our democratic values. But that's excellent, and thank you for that survey. Let me return, if I may, now to the UK, because quite a few people have asked questions about, if we get more involved with the EU in relation to defence, is this a kind of entree back into the Union? Not a direct entree, obviously, but if the EU, as Michael outlined, makes serious improvements on its procurement and interoperability of its defence buying and support, and the UK becomes part of that, 2 big ifs, but if the UK becomes part of that, given that that's part of the industrial structure of the European Union, takes us potentially back into the single market in many ways, does this make it more or less likely that the UK could become, once again, an applicant for real membership, actual membership of the EU, or are we still a long way from that? And I'm probably doing it very badly, but I'm trying to paraphrase 3 or 4 questions on that topic. And again, maybe Alexandra, you might want to kick off on that.
Okay, thank you. I really only have time for one more question after this,
Sure.
so I will be brief on this. I mean, I've already hinted that I think the changing geopolitical environment is changing the context in which the UK or citizens of the UK think about the EU. There's that success breeds success. So if the UK forges a successful and productive partnership with the EU in one area, in theory, that ought to make it easier to suggest we improve cooperation in a different area. Against that, I remember, albeit in very different geopolitical times, at the start of the Ukraine war, I remember taking part in similar webinars like this, where the UK did, as I understand it, cooperate very quickly with European partners on things like sanctions. And I remember then there was some discussion, does this herald a different mindset? And I remember British Foreign Office officials telling me, off the record, of course, that actually for the Conservative government at the time, their interpretation was, see, we don't need to be in the EU in order to be able to cooperate effectively, that these kind of ad hoc partnerships will work. So they drew a different conclusion from the one that I think certainly I would hope, which is, yeah, this is a beneficial relationship, and the more we cooperate, the more sense it makes to cooperate in other areas. So people could spin it either way. I have time for one more rapid fire question, so I'll let Michael go on this one. And then if anyone's got any last questions for me, fire them away in the chat now.
Well, very quickly, I think with closer defense cooperation, there are the two aspects. The one is the single market for defense, so to say, the procurement and on the purchasing and all that, and the defense planning. And the other thing is, of course, the decision, and that remains also intergovernmental and and unanimous when it is about war and peace. So these political decisions, are we now engaging in this or that way towards Russia? And so far, we are sovereign nations in this field of policy making and remain it. And it's up to every government then to be part of a coalition of the willing or not. But the other aspects, they facilitate, so to say, our job while we, so to say, have economies of scale and better interoperability. That is what, through a single market and some coordination, can be achieved there.
Thanks. Perhaps, Alexandra, you could answer Helen McAvoy's question, which, before you have to leave us, which is really saying, it's not quite saying that Europe can't do anything, but we also need Democrats and Republicans in the US to stand up for Trump. And you touched on some of this at the beginning. Do you see any real resistance developing? Or, as Mikhail said also at the beginning, that they all seem to be sitting on their hands waiting for the midterms?
This is very frightening as somebody who is living in America. All of us have been waiting for Congress to do its job, and we have been waiting so far without results. We keep, when I chat to people both in the Republican and Democrat circles, we say, they say this can't go on for 4 years. Something's going to happen. The bubble will eventually burst. And yet it hasn't. And each week, things that would have seemed unimaginable 2 weeks ago, we've forgotten what happened 2 weeks. We're now in the realm of something even more atrocious and new. And now we're having a serious discussion about whether Trump is even willing to defy the Supreme Court. He's shown himself willing to defy judges. This is going to go to the Supreme Court. The Democrat congressman who I was talking to yesterday said Congress has basically ceded its powers. Judges are issuing rulings against the administration, and the administration is defying those rulings. There have been rulings telling them to reinstate USAID funding, to pay contractors for work they've already done, to reinstall people who were fired without cause from their jobs, to explain how they deported people without due process. All these court orders the administration is continuing to defy. So it comes before the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court rules in Trump's favor, this Democrat congressman said, our Constitution is effectively done. So we are waiting. And it is simply a mystery. The Democrats are split between those who are still, as Michael said, operating in as if these were still normal times and they just have to position themselves for the midterms. But by the time the midterms come around, there may not be any institutions to rebuild. So others are saying, no, we need to be much more radical and forceful now. But the challenge they have is if they speak out, they risk defending policies that voters found unpopular, like, you know, these woke policies or immigration. And so the Democrats are still trying to find their voice and find unanimity. And then the levers at their disposal are quite small because they don't have a single leader of the opposition who can act as a sort of spokesman. Their power is dispersed. And until they get their new candidate for president, they don't kind of have a figurehead. So the Democrats sort of haven't yet found their voice. And the Republicans, they are either totally on board with it and have just decided to sell their soul. Either they're totally on board with it because they're part of the MAGA movement anyway, or they are thinking they could achieve more behind the scenes and that they could just have a quiet word with their friend Marco Rubio or the foreign, you know, people in the White House, and they could just try and have influence behind the scenes. And I think that's very naive, and they are not having any effect. And then there are those who are genuinely intimidated. There are those who are worried about facing primary challenges or of getting bullied by Musk on social media. So both on the, and then once they've begun to be co-opted with the administration, then they go into a defensive huddle and they can say, oh, well, it's the Democrats' fault. And they start being defensive about their actions. And so the only way they can reconcile this in their own head is by beginning to believe drink the Kool-Aid as well. So I'm absolutely horrified by this, but Republicans and Democrats on the Hill are not meeting the moment at all. Business leaders are obviously getting hurt by what's going on, but they also hope that they can get exemptions from the tariffs for their own particular interest. And they remember what happened in Trump 1, when Trump would publicly go after a firm that he saw as unhelpful, like Harley Davidson. He went after Harley Davidson in his first term. So they don't want to get on the wrong side of Trump publicly. And a lot of their workers are Trump supporters. So then you have the general public. And for the general public, you know, a lot of them aren't fully aware of what's going on still. There's a lot of misinformation out there, or they voted for this and they may not like all the ways in which this is being done, but they support the efforts on immigration and the like. And they're just not used to mass resistance. I mean, there's a lot of very unhappy people here right now. But they're not used to this. Things are happening at a speed that is hard for people to grapple with. They don't have a tradition of resistance. They trusted in their democracy. They trusted in their system because it's always worked. So I keep waiting for this bubble to burst, something to happen. And it's very scary. Some of you who follow me on other places will have seen me writing about this. It is very, very scary living here right now. So that's a cheerful note. I have to leave.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks
So much for having me on here. I have to deal with my kids right now and fishing and things like that.
You warned us you had to leave at 8:15, but thank you very much for being with us. It does rather worry us that this famous checks and balances that are supposed to exist in the American Constitution seems so easily to be swept aside. But we're very grateful for your time, and I hope Mikael can stay for just a couple of more, and then we'll finish
I just
off.
saw that from Michael. I'll just say one other thought that was completely astonishing for me and sort of unprecedented, but Germany and Canada and the UK and maybe other countries as well are now issuing travel warnings about travel to the US.
Oh.
I mean, you know, that's just astonishing. All right, thank you. It was a great privilege to be here. Thank you.
Once again, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, I'm here.
Michael, I wonder if we could finish off with a couple of economic questions, slightly different, but Martin Roach asked right at the very start of this webinar, how can Europe, including the UK, make more attractive for big European corporations to do more business in Europe? And this may be beyond you, I don't know if you follow this, but he says, can the Capital Markets Directive be re-energized so the SME sector can be a bigger force in strengthening Europe's domestic economy?
No, well, definitely we have overdone, unfortunately, our policy. Everything. I mean, none of us is against climate change. Well, all this Fit for 55 program to reduce the CO2 emissions and all that. But what we have done over the years in many sectors, we have added so much red tape, so much incredible bureaucracy on those people who would like to undertake something, do something, and they are kept with bureaucracy and reporting and so on. And what we are now having in the pipeline is what we call omnibus regulations, and there will be several omnibus regulations where we remove and hopefully abolish, but at least facilitate and make easier so many of these bureaucratic load. And just today I had another example of an SME entrepreneur who delivers in the defense sector some products to the big industry. And all these big ones, he says, I have 40 employees and I'm producing something. It's the only thing, I'm the only one who produces it. And he gets it from China, what he produces there. And then all the big ones, Rheinmetall, or the named German and European defense companies, they send him thick questionnaires, what he has to answer and to do. And he says, I cannot get my people to do the real job. They are all busy with this. And I will not, if that continues, I will not survive this time. And that is where we must really liberate the people from red tape and unnecessary bureaucracy that doesn't serve any real purpose, in the best intention perhaps at some point, but doesn't serve the purpose. And insofar, I think we are on a good track. We have understood the message, and I think it becomes more and more attractive again to invest in Europe or to cooperate with us. So that is the answer that I can give at this stage. And we will definitely be after those people in the Commission who still think the old way. And but we have new commissioners, many very committed ones, who are now not waiting what comes bottom up from the general directorates, but who put in on top downwards to see that they say what they want to see and what they want to be abolished and so on. That is where we are, and I'm hopeful that we are getting better.
Thank you very much. One last question, if I may, Michael, and I promise it is the last question. I noticed today that we suspended the proposal to introduce the retaliatory tariffs on the 1st of April against the US steel and aluminium tariffs. Do you know why we've taken this decision? I was a bit surprised.
I was not aware. I was all the day busy with other things. So
sure, no, don't worry then. Yeah. It was just announced this afternoon. Yeah. But
perhaps we got some notes from the US that they would in return then also not do it. I mean,
I wondered, but there was no explanation.
I can't explain.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. We know how busy you are, and as I said at the beginning, we're extremely grateful for you finding time. And personally, it's been great to see you again. So much obliged for taking part.
Thank you, and well, all the best for Scotland.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
And UK also, of course.
Thank you. And can I just say to some people want to applaud Michael. Sadly, there's no sound really, so we can't really do it. But just say to everybody else that's been taking part, I hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly have, and I'm sure you have. Please follow our website and our social media for future announcements regarding more webinars and other activities of the European movement, because we do need to keep this momentum going. But in the interim, thanks everybody. Thanks again to our two speakers, and thanks to Michael for staying on. Enjoy your evening, and I don't know the current score in the Scotland game, but let's hope we're winning. Good night, everybody. Thanks very much.
Good night.
Thank you, David. Good night.